Greetings everyone, thank you for tuning in. Welcome to Knowledge with Kelebawiyan. Today we're going to look at a concept called course integration. Course integration is a signature program at Kelebawi International Academy. Course integration, what is it? Course integration is a teaching and learning pedagogy of studying concepts from various perspectives, various disciplines, various subjects. You take one concept or one idea and you try to study it, analyze it from various perspectives. Okay? After you do that, you kind of synthesize that knowledge into one whole body of knowledge. Why is course integration important? Course integration is important for several reasons. One reason is because knowledge doesn't exist in isolation. All knowledge is interconnected. Whatever concept you can think of, whatever topic you can think of, you can find ways that how it's related to other subjects seemingly very far apart in nature, in texture, etc. So all knowledge is interconnected. The second reason why course integration is important is, at Kelebawi at least, we think of it as our leadership training program. How is course integration related to leadership, you might ask? One key component of good leadership is the capacity, the ability to see whatever problem or opportunity that exists from multiple perspectives, looking at a situation from various different angles. That's one component of leadership. Well, how do people develop that? People have to be taught in the process of their development on how to see things from various perspectives. For example, if we want to create solutions for our problems, let's say, in the education sector, one has to be very mindful about issues related to education as far as health is concerned. So the health ministry has to coordinate with the education ministry. If we want to create solutions for problems, let's say, in the health sector, we better know how to communicate and work out details with transportation ministry. So all things are interrelated. And recently, in the Ethiopian government, there are some initiatives called the multi-sector collaboration initiatives. These are very good signs. But we strongly believe that we need a labor force, we need a workforce, we need an educated citizenry that thinks in terms of valuing the idea of seeing things from various perspectives. For our students, when they mature in this process, you give them any topic and it becomes second nature to them in terms of looking at things from various angles. How does this course integration or the idea of looking at things from various perspectives actually work? Let's see how this concept around balance or equilibrium, which is the concept that we're going to see in various subjects this week, is seen from a psychology perspective. A couple of weeks ago, we did an episode in psychology. We're going to look at that episode as an example of how balance or equilibrium is seen in psychology, and then we'll be right back. So today we're going to talk about African psychology with the intention of reaching the height of human righteousness. How do we do that? Well, all things from an Afro-centric perspective work in systems. Systems within systems. Circles within circles. Circles within circles. Within my body, atoms, cells, body organs, body parts, physically, psychological, internal life, emotional life, mental life, spiritual life. All these are functioning within my individual being. But I also came through a family. So there's a system of family that I'm a part of. And that family is part of a community system. And that community is part of a system of a country or a nation, which in turn is a system within a continent. And a continent as a system, the African system, is also a part of the global system. which makes up the planet. And the planet is part of a system within a galaxy, the universe, etc. The same rules govern the atomic, cellular level and the universal level. That's what we're going to talk about. If you understand this, there is alignment that takes place whereby you'll be integrated within and without for the ideal mental health and physical as well as metaphysical or spiritual satisfaction. The first thing is that all things are interconnected. All things are interconnected. Within my physical system, all things are interconnected. My digestive system is interconnected with my neurological system. My emotional system is connected with my spiritual system. Me as an individual, eternally and fundamentally connected to my family system. Because if I say I'm a father, who do I need? I need my children. To say I am whatever I claim to be, I need something or someone outside of myself. I am a father because of my children. I am a husband because of my charming wife, etc. If I say I'm Ethiopian, to say I'm Ethiopian, what do I need? I need a group of people who have lived in a particular geographic location, mapped by a geographic territorial boundary for a number of years, and world systems have recognized that particular group of people and that particular history as Ethiopians and Ethiopian history. I need that. Without that, I can't claim to be Ethiopian. So all things are interconnected. It's like a spider web. There's an Ethiopian expression that says, "አፍንጫ ሲመታ አይን ያለቅሳል." ምን አግብቶት ነው አይን የሚያለቅሰው አፍንጫ ሲመታ? It's because this expression is to indicate or to point to what in the Western world metaphysics points to. Quantum physics tells us the very same thing. So the first concept is to understand that everything is interconnected. Events that take place in North America affect our emotional state in Addis Ababa. Events that take place in China affect environmental conditions in South America. Everything is interconnected. The way the Earth rotates its galaxy affects other planets. That's the first thing to understand, the interconnection of all things. Now, let's look at internally who I am as a person. Like I mentioned earlier, I have a psychological life, I have an emotional life, I have a mental life, I have a physical life, and I have a spiritual life. I exist within a system. I'm a professional, that's a work environment. I'm a family man, that's a system. Each system may pull me in seemingly opposing directions. Within myself, I have feelings and I have thoughts. My feelings and my emotions might pull me one way. My emotional being, my emotional state might pull me one way. My mental state, what I think about, might pull me one way. So there is tension that's inherent in all systems. When the Earth revolves around its galaxy, there is a pull and push tension. Okay? That's where the concept of balance comes in. Ideal mental health at all systems is about equilibrium. It's maintaining that balance. Emotional life, mental life, emotional wants, mental wants, family demands, work demands. Some of you young people, you might want this thing, but your parents want you to do these other things. There's always tension when we exist and talk about systems. So the idea of balance is the idea that points to this notion of maintaining some kind of equilibrium whereby I'm functioning quite well at work, but I haven't abandoned my family. I have satisfied my emotional needs, but I haven't abandoned completely what my mind tells me to do. So that balance leads to what we call harmony. Harmony. A complete state of being whereby there is no tension strong enough to be disruptive in terms of being okay with one's self. Okay? The tension is there. The attempt to do balancing is there. If adequate balancing is done, there is a sense of being at ease, being comfortable in one's own skin, being in tune with one's own life rhythm, if you will, your own step by step. You're not tense. You're not trying too hard. Life seems to kind of flow. Okay, that's the harmony I'm talking about. And sometimes you may feel that harmony, that alignment, when you get into things that you are really passionate about, and you're doing it, and time seems to cease. What you really love to do deeply in your deepest of being, and the external actual work of doing that, the tension dissolving to an extent that there is perfect balance, that harmonious feeling is experienced when you get into that space. That's why at Labawi we say, be fully expressed. When you're in full expression and you have created this balance of external needs, wants, push and pulls, internal needs, wants, push and pull, a state of harmony naturally emerges. By the way, that's our natural state of being. Our natural state of being is one of harmony because the system is designed to be harmonious. Psychological, societal, etc. These tensions that pull us one way or the other create the tension, but if one is mindful, that harmony is not created because you're already harmonious. It's uncovered, it's discovered. Meditation, prayer, all these things of coming back to your own self help towards that journey. Another aspect of African psychology is in the Western world, there is a cognitive epistemology. Epistemology means how do you know what you think you know? You might think that you know this or that. Well, how do you know that you know that? There are different ways of knowing. There are different ways of acquiring knowledge. From a Western psychological perspective, the scientific method is upheld as the highest form of knowledge acquisition. You set a hypothesis, you experiment, you test the hypothesis through experiments. In a lab situation, okay, you use the 5 senses, you dissect, you measure, you cut, and you come up with some kind of conclusion. That's one way of knowing, and it's very helpful. And it has given us profound medical, technological, and other advancements that have moved the human species from the dark ages into modern times. There's another way of knowing, and that's called affective epistemology. And that's intuitive way of knowing, that's heart knowing. It was Rumi who once said, what was said to the flower that made it open was said to me here in my chest. That's heart knowing. When you witness a beautiful sunset, you don't say, oh, the sun is setting because at 55 longitude and 68 degrees and at this time and that time. And no, you just know beyond knowing that something of magnificence is happening. Truth is revealing itself. That's heart knowing. African psychology gives more importance to affective way of knowing, affective epistemology. But it doesn't deny the importance or the significance of cognitive ways of knowing either. So we depend at base on affective ways of knowing, intuitive ways of knowing, and we add the cognitive capacity that we have to create the balance and the harmony that I was telling you about. This is the very basic introduction of African psychology. Our next guest is Ato Fasika Yimam. He is our physics instructor at Kelebawi International Academy. Ato Fasika, welcome, and it's very nice to see you.
Nice to see you too.
My first question to you is, how are the concept of equilibrium or balance seen in physics?
Okay, thank you so much. So let me start from definition of equilibrium, right? So equilibrium is a Latin word, which is a combination of two words, equi and libra, meaning equal balance. So when we say equilibrium in physics, it means that it's just a state of balance in which opposing forces cancel out each other or neutralize each other. And a body is said to be in equilibrium if that object is at rest or in uniform motion.
When you come to the first condition of equilibrium, it is sometimes called translational equilibrium. And this condition states that the sum of all forces acting on an object equals 0. Meaning, if the net force acting on an object gives 0, the acceleration of that object will be 0. And as we all know, the acceleration of a body will be 0 in two different ways. The first one is when the object is at rest, and the second one is when the object is moving with constant velocity. So from this, we can say that if an object is at rest, its velocity is 0, its acceleration is 0, the net force acting on that object is 0, and therefore it satisfies first condition of equilibrium. And this particular case, we call this equilibrium static equilibrium. But when we take the second one, for instance, when the object is moving with constant velocity, its acceleration will be 0, and hence the net force will be 0, and therefore it also satisfies the first condition of equilibrium. And since the object is in motion and satisfies this first condition of equilibrium, we call this particular condition dynamic equilibrium. Let's see the second condition of equilibrium. So second condition of equilibrium talks about torque or moment. So when you say torque, it means that it is a turning effect of a force, and it is a product of lever arm and force. When you say lever arm, it is a distance between the center of mass of that rigid object to the point of application of the force. Therefore, the second condition of equilibrium states that the net torque acting on a given object about any axis must be 0. In this case also, we have two different situations. We have two different cases. The first one is, for instance, if an object is at rest, there is no rotation, meaning there is no angular velocity and there is no angular acceleration. As a result, the net torque will be 0. And in this case, we can say that it is in static equilibrium. But if the object is rotating about an axis with constant angular velocity, it is in motion, but there is no angular acceleration, and therefore there is no net torque. Again, we can say that it satisfies second condition of equilibrium, but it is in motion, mind you, and therefore this kind of equilibrium is known as dynamic equilibrium. Now, how do we know if an object is in equilibrium? So there are necessary conditions for equilibrium. For instance, if we take a particle, then we assume that all the applied forces acted or applied on the center of mass of that object, then it satisfies second condition of equilibrium by default, and therefore we have to check whether it satisfies first condition of equilibrium or not. Now, if you take a rigid body as it is, when you say a rigid body, it is an extended body in space that does not change its size and shape. So if we apply external forces on this rigid body, or in order to say that it is in equilibrium, this rigid body should satisfy both first condition and second condition of equilibrium. So based on stability of equilibrium, we can classify or categorize this equilibrium into three as stable, unstable, and neutral equilibrium. So let's see the first one. So when we say stable equilibrium, in this case, the center of gravity is at lowest possible position. So when we say center of gravity, it is a point where the total weight of that object is assumed to be concentrated. And this center of gravity should be at the lowest possible position to say that it is in stable equilibrium. And again, the center of gravity needs to be raised in order to topple the object, and they are difficult to topple over. But when we see unstable equilibrium, the center of gravity is at the highest possible position, and it is lowered in order to topple the object. So they are easy to topple down. And the third one is neutral equilibrium. So when we say neutral equilibrium, as the name indicates, the center of gravity is neither lowered nor raised when the object is toppled, and they roll from one side to another. And basically, there are three factors that can affect the stability of a certain object. So these three factors are mass of the object, location of center of gravity, and area of the base of support. So for instance, if you take the mass of the object or the weight of the object, the heavier the object is, the more stable it is. And when we see location of center of gravity, as I have tried to explain earlier, to be stable, the center of gravity should be at the lowest possible position. And the other one is area of the base of support. So the bigger the area of the base, the more the stable the object is.
Ato Fasika, thank you so much for this fascinating, comprehensive explanation. Now, I would like to ask you a follow-up question. What are the practical applications of equilibrium locally and globally?
Okay, thank you. So let me start from the application of this equilibrium in civil engineering, okay? So civil engineers just apply the concept of equilibrium in designing bridges, buildings, and like dams and so on.
By calculating the forces that are applied, the engineers will maintain the balance of the structure against whatever force that is being exerted, and thus maintaining a state of equilibrium. So for instance, if you take a building, to design a building, then they have to consider the external forces that the building may come across, like wind force, dead load, meaning own weight of the building, live load, the forces that can be added once the building is just constructed, and earthquake loads. So these forces should be assumed or expected and should be considered in the design part. And again, the bearing capacity of the soil should be studied. And we did all this because at the end of the day, the sum of all forces acting on that building and the sum of all moments or torques acting on that building should give us zero. It should be in static equilibrium. And the building of different monuments is also one very common area of application of equilibrium. Take for instance equilibrio sculpture. So it's made from large stones and they are piled on the top of the other vertically, and it may look like a magic, but this happens because of the principle of equilibrium. And when we see dynamic equilibrium, we can take Ferris wheel as an example of rotational equilibrium. It is rotating about a certain axis vertically, and if it is moving with a constant tangential speed, then we can say that it is in rotational equilibrium. When it comes to Ethiopia, the construction of various historical monuments applies the theory of equilibrium. An example could be just the Aksum obelisks, and in this case the highest of which rises over 23 meters and it is still standing, meaning it satisfies conditions of equilibrium or static equilibrium. We can also see the rock-hewn churches like Lalibela and other different buildings that are just constructed earlier, and such kind of buildings are just made from monolithic blocks, and these blocks were further chiseled out, forming doors, windows, columns, various floors, roofs, and so on. So all these buildings are still standing, meaning that they are at rest or they are stationary, so they satisfy first condition of equilibrium and second condition of equilibrium. In this case, you have to bear in mind that when we apply equal and opposite forces on an object concurrently at its center of mass, the net torque is also zero. It is in equilibrium, but there is deformation. Okay? If the forces are large enough, there will be deformation. And depending on the allowable deflection or bending of this building, we can construct the beam and the column and so on, starting from the foundation. Now, let's see some other examples related to this construction. So the construction of traditional huts like gojo beit in Amharic could also be an example. So in construction of these houses has to be distributed, or the load or the weight of the roof has to be distributed in such a way as to avoid it caving in on its inhabitants. So to keep the balance of the roof, there is one pillar, we call it in Amharic msasso, at the middle of the house. And this pillar controls the equilibrium balance of the roof and the house. And we can also see that in farming practices, farmers plow their fields using 2 oxen. They put the camber on the 2 oxen on the left and right hand side to create balance or equilibrium and plow the field with the mower. So farmers use this principle of equilibrium. Without knowing the formula, they really understand the concept of equilibrium. So other example is just most people in the rural areas of Ethiopia tend to carry things on their heads like water and pots, and they make sure that it doesn't fall. And here equilibrium is in action. The net force is zero with a pulling force due to gravity, and the force the person applies on the object with their head and hands, and therefore the object does not move while making sure it doesn't sway from side to side. Not only this one, in the rural areas, donkeys and other domestic animals are used to transport materials as well as people. So when we put the material on the animal's back in the way that is well balanced, so it holds safely. But if there is more load on either side of the animal back, it might eventually fall because of the positive net torque. Even the donkey might not feel comfortable either and may act badly.
Ato Fasika, thank you so much for educating us on the concept of equilibrium in physics.
Thank you so much.